Thank you, Frank. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Alan Bennett, the playwright, once said that he could never understand the reason for war because the instincts underlying it were perfectly well accommodated in the domestic arrangements of most people. And it's certainly true that a great deal of violence takes place within the marriage situation. In the case of women, most violence is marital violence. It's occurring within the home. The figure for men in this particular Scottish study is almost certainly underestimated, partly because men feel ashamed about reporting the fact that their wife has beaten them up. And also, of course, men are subjected to more other forms of violence, which rather reduces that section of the pie chart. But the latest estimates throughout the UK are that about 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men are victims of domestic violence. There are some studies of American university students that also show that dating couples inflict a great deal of violence upon each other. 36% of girls reported being kicked, punched, scratched, slapped, choked, threatened with a weapon, or otherwise offered some form of violence. And what is even more astonishing is the fact that 44% of those women stayed with their particular partner. Now, the term sex wars is a little bit ambiguous. There are situations where the genders will form alliances for political purposes. In the case of Lysistrata, the Aristophanes comedy, the women would gang together in order to withhold sex from their men until they declared peace with Sparta. And of course, we see in the modern world that women will form alliances for political reasons to get equal pay or in anti-rape campaigns. But that's not the kind of gender war that I'm talking about here mainly. I'm looking at the sorts of competitive struggles that occur in the encounters within particular male-female pairs within society, usually dating or married couples. And what we will see as a theme emerging from most of this is that while there are some outright physical battles go on from time to time, much more of the competitive struggle is more subtle than that, and it amounts to a kind of an evolutionary arms race that goes on between a man and a woman, each one fighting for gene survival to their own advantage, whether or not it coincides with the needs of their partner. Because a great deal of the conflict between men and women seems to be rooted in the fact that they have different desires, different needs, and they are seldom interlocking perfectly. The desires of men and women are seldom 100% complementary, and this is where the problem arises. For example, parental investment, which is the fact that eggs are at more of a premium than male sperm, has led to a tendency for men to be much more interested in casual sex and partner variety than women, women preferring to wait until there is some evidence of emotional involvement before they will engage in a sexual relationship. The result is, of course, that men tend to want to move faster in a relationship. They bother women sooner and more aggressively for sex than most of those women would want. Most of them are requiring evidence of emotional involvement in the relationship. So clearly those are two desires which cannot be simultaneously satisfied. The American comedian Max Kaufman once quipped, "She was a lovely girl. Our courtship was fast and furious. I was fast and she was furious. That rather typifies the situation. And an internet survey of 1,743 people who had had one-night stands discovered that the majority of the men had very positive feelings about that, reported satisfaction, contentment, increased confidence following the encounter, whereas the women very often felt negatively about it. They felt used and regretful following a one-night stand. Now, men seem to have evolved a tendency to infer sexual interest in women where none actually exists. A typical experiment is to film an encounter between a male and female, just a friendly, normal little chat between them, and the subjects are asked to say to what extent each partner is being flirtatious or seductive. Now, the men have a tendency to overestimate the extent to which the female is being seductive. They are much more likely to perceive sexual interest in a smiling, friendly person of the opposite sex, when in fact, of course, the reverse is more likely to be the case. The men are more likely to have sex on the brain than the females. Now, you can understand that that is the more adaptive error to make, in that, well, particularly for a man, in that occasionally it might actually lead to sex. If he failed to recognize sexual interest when it did exist, then he would have missed an opportunity. Women, of course, on their own admission, will sometimes use flirtation as a tactic to get what they want from men without ever having any intention of having sex with them. Now, if you put those two tendencies together, you can see how easy it might be for men to feel that they're being teased, with resentment building as a result of that. Now, the flip side of this insincere female flirtation, is the tendency for some men to feign love in order to get sex. Study of American college students found that 97% of women were victims of this strategy, while 71% of the men admitted using it. Now, again, you can see there are clear evolutionary origins to this. Ancestral women risked being left with a baby, literally, while the casual male moved on. And not surprisingly, women guard against such deception by requiring greater courtship effort, buying time in order to assess the intentions of their suitor. Men who tire of playing these games, tire of the delays and hurdles which this might involve, could choose to pay up front for sexual novelty, which is why prostitution is the oldest profession, and it's almost entirely female. Women are much more successful as prostitutes than men are as gigolos. Now, one handsome Hollywood star was asked why he used the call girls provided by Heidi Fleiss. He said, you know, you're a handsome person, as he was, I won't mention his name, and you could get any woman you wanted. And he said, you misunderstand me. I don't pay these women to have sex. I pay them to go away afterwards. And that maybe is the core of prostitution. Of course, sex without love is very seldom sought by women. Sexual harassment in the workplace is another area where the evolved differences between men and women are manifest. Women are much more likely to take offence at sexual advances than men. And, of course, the men will target young, sexually attractive, single women disproportionately. However, the extent to which a woman is upset by a sexual advance rather depends on the status of the harasser. Advances are much less welcome from married men, from those of low occupational status, and those who they perceive as being coercive and sexual rather than romantic. Men don't seem to protest sexual suggestions in the workplace, however they are perceived, though, of course, they would be even more welcome from the young, attractive females. At the same time, there are some women who gain material advantages in the workplace through casual mating and flirtation, again, on their own admission. Now, the most extreme form of sexual harassment, of course, is forced sex or rape. Evolutionary psychologists have proposed that although rape is repugnant to the victim and risky to the rapist, in that he might get lynched or castrated or something, it could be adaptive genetically in the sense that a man who steals sex because he cannot get consent from the woman gives his genes at least a chance of replication. In other words, the choice of the loser male might be either using force or genetic extinction. Now, the evidence for this is equivocal. That is, rapists as a group tend to be high in libido, they tend to be impulsive, they tend to be brutal, lacking in empathy. All of that is true. They're also likely to have a record of property crime, which is interesting because rape is a form of stealing somebody else's woman. However, they are not likely, or not necessarily, sexually deprived. That is, they do have, more often than not, access to legitimate sexual activity, and the rape is in some sense a top-up. Now, here's an interesting thing. Rape victims seem to get pregnant beyond chance expectation. The best estimates from the research are that they're likely to get pregnant on about 8% of occasions of unprotected sex, that is, not using contraception, as against 3% for a one-night stand with a consenting partner. Now, that's interesting because there are a few theories as to how this might come about. The first explanation, and possibly the most powerful, is that the victims of rapists are especially fertile at the time. They tend to be young, attractive, and mid-cycle. That, incidentally, is the distribution of the ages of female rape victims compared with female murder victims. And you can see that the years of fertility are the ones that are favoured by the rapist. So that's one explanation. There are others, however. One is that the trauma of rape might induce ovulation by some process. It does so in certain non-human animals. And a third idea is that the ejaculate of a rapist may, in some sense, be more potent or better received by the female reproductive system than that of the man who is having consenting sex. There is a so-called sexy sun hypothesis, which is that women enjoy the attentions of psychopaths and rapists and promiscuous, irresponsible males on the grounds that if any sons that they produced carried those genes, it would be good for promoting them into following generations. Just as an aside, I understand that somebody has calculated that about a quarter of the European population carry the genes of Genghis Khan, who no doubt was this kind of a man in his day. Now this, whoops, I didn't mean to get to that one. We'll come to that later, yes. This idea that women in some sense conspire in their own rape is understandably extremely controversial and unpopular in certain quarters. And certainly if there is any conspiring going on, it is not conscious. It is the genes operating at an unconscious level. But it is interesting that quite a high proportion of women who report date rape continue to date the abuser. And that might fit such an explanation. One sense in which women might conspire with sexual marauders concerns that the signals that they emit when they are fertile. There is research that shows that women are more flirtatious when they're ovulating. They tend to expose more flesh and dance more provocatively. Interestingly, that this is especially so when they have a partner waiting for them back home and they are out on the loose with the girls. They tend to be more interested in sex. They buy sexier clothing, and they're more easily aroused and more prone to infidelity at fertile times of the cycle. All of which might suggest that they, in some sense, contribute to their own rape. That does not justify it, of course, as I will go on to say later. And this particular image here, I don't know if you can read that red writing, but it's a feminist propaganda poster saying, "This is not an invitation to rape me." And, that is certainly true, that just because a woman dresses provocatively does not entitle any man to rape her. As I say, there's no suggestion that the mechanisms involved are conscious. And if we consider this concept of pheromone wars, it's a nice example of the evolutionary arms race. Men secrete a pheromone called androstenone, which repels other men, and it repels women, except for the women that are ovulating. Very clever little pheromone, that one. And the women who are ovulating seem to be attracted to it. Women, however, have got an answer to this. They secrete copulins, a pheromone which will interfere with the male's ability to discriminate against unattractive women. And although this particular study didn't show it, quite possibly impairs their ability to detect an ovulating woman as against a non-fertile woman. So the pheromones are engaged in their own little arms race, again played out almost entirely below the level of our awareness. Now the cold brutality of genetic conflict is nowhere more obvious than in the case of infanticide. You'll be familiar with the fact that lions will kill the offspring of a rival lion before re-impregnating the lioness, which has obvious genetic advantage. And we advanced, godlike human beings would be loath to admit any such tendencies at the human level. But there are some tribal societies in which the men insist that a child be killed if they suspect that they are not the biological father, if it doesn't look sufficiently like them, for example, or suspiciously like somebody else in the village. Terribly brutal. In Western society, there's a residual of this as well, where before the age of about 2, a child is very much more likely to be murdered by a step-parent than a biological parent, by a factor of somewhere between 40 and 100. It's a considerable multiple. And mothers who kill their own babies are usually in the thrall of a new male partner, and it's some kind of conspiracy between them or an attempt by her to retain the new partner, even if it means sacrificing the child from a previous partner. Those are the actual statistics showing that before the age of 2, the chances of a baby being murdered where there is one natural and one step-parent in the family are way higher than the situation where there are 2 natural parents. So again, evolutionary psychology reminds us of our primitive basic nature, however much we are striving to deny it and suppress it. There is a bit of the animal remaining in us. Now, infidelity, of course, is another obvious battleground in the evolutionary arms race. Men, as we know, can gain genetic advantage from wide distribution of their sperm, because sperm are two a penny. Women don't gain very much from multiple partners because only one of them is going to father her child, and she is better ensuring that it is the right male. In the case of men, if they get the wrong female pregnant on one occasion, doesn't preclude getting the right one pregnant later on. However, we now know that there are motives, or there are ways in which women can gain through affairs as well, that they do have their own motives for infidelity. One is fertility insurance, just in case the regular partner is infertile. For some reason, it might help to have a bit of backup. In one of my previous lectures, I mentioned the case of a chap who went in to have a vasectomy after his third child, and the doctor said, "Oh, you don't need this operation because there is a peculiar twist in your tubes whereby you could not have fathered children anyway," which is a bit embarrassing to take that news back to the wife. The other female motive, of course, is the idea of acquiring good genes. And observing the behaviour of women, as people like Carl Grammer have done at different stages of the cycle, would show that women are more exploratory when they're fertile, and the idea might be that they are seeking to get good genes for their offspring while maintaining a secure base at home. So you've got you marry the wimp and have sex with a stud, I suppose, is the principle that might be followed by some women. Again, almost entirely at the subconscious level. The paternal discrepancy of 10% means that in Western society, something like 10% of children are fathered by somebody other than the presumed father. The fact that humans are not naturally monogamous is indicated by certain anatomical comparisons between humans and other great apes. Where an ape is monogamous, the males and females tend to be the same size, as they are in the case of the gibbon. I think possibly the gibbon is the only monogamous primate. The most promiscuous primate is the bonobo, a kind of chimpanzee, and interestingly our nearest relative genetically. And it seems that you can predict promiscuity by the size of the testicles relative to the rest of the body. In this particular dimension, gorillas have the smallest testicles and bonobos the largest. Now, the idea is that gorillas don't have to worry about sperm competition. They are so much bigger than their female that they bully her into avoiding all other male contact. In fact, they have several females that they protect from other usurper males by dint of brute strength. Whereas the bonobos and chimpanzees tend to be relatively promiscuous. There are other strategies. The orangutan seems to be the sort of the rapist of the jungle. He makes a quick hit, which the female doesn't seem to appreciate, and then he rushes off on the lookout for another one somewhere else. It seems as though the females do not enjoy the sexual contact that is forced upon them. So they are the rapists of the jungle. Now, the interesting thing is that human beings are unique in the sense that they seem to mix these various strategies. Different individuals seem to favour one or the other, or the same individual might favour several breeding strategies at different times of his life. Human males and females have the capacity to be promiscuous. Sometimes they are harem builders. Occasionally they're monogamous, it's true, and occasionally they have coercive sex, but quite a few males will mix these different strategies, and all of them can be found represented within human society. The size of the arrow is the relative size of the penis, in which the human is champion as a matter of interest, and it's not clear why. Some people think that having a large penis helps him to maintain the interest of the female by giving her a greater degree of pleasure. That's a controversial but interesting theory. Now, of course, large testicles are only necessary where sperm will have to compete with those of other males, which means that the female would have to be having sex with more than one male in a very short period of time. And the statistic which would relate to this is the finding that 30% of sexually active women admit to having sex with different men within a 24-hour time frame, or at least they have done so at some point in their life, which gives the opportunity for sperm competition. The other interesting thing about this is that human sperm under a microscope are not all identical. You might suppose that they all look much the same, and it's just that the fastest is the one that that wins the 100 kilometers and manages to impregnate the egg. But it appears that they are specialized for different functions, like some of the social insects are. The hypothesis is that while some sperm are egg getters, they just go straight for the target from the outset, fast as possible. Others seem to be specialized as kamikazes. They are there to destroy the sperm of any other males that might be lingering in the female reproductive system. At least this is the hypothesis of Baker and Ballas, who are the primary exponents of this sperm competition idea. It's a strong hypothesis, but there is still a debate going on as to whether this is the fact of the matter. Now, jealousy is the emotion that you feel when you think you are being threatened by a love rival. It takes different forms for men and women. In the case of men, it focuses on the act of penetration, which of course connects with the fear of cuckoldry, the idea that you might be left bringing up the offspring of another man, that they do not carry your genes, and therefore it is not to your selfish genetic advantage to be investing so many resources into an offspring that is carrying the genes of a rival male. In the case of women, jealousy tends to focus more on signs of emotional commitment, the likelihood that the male partner is going to move on, shift his affection and, of course, his resources to another partner. Of course, both males and females are concerned about the other as well, but this is a question of the relative emphasis of jealousy and where jealousy becomes most explosive. Now, jealousy, of course, would have no benefit if it did not lead to some kind of emotional change, a behavioral change. No point in having an emotion unless it's going to lead to some kind of useful behavior. And the relevant behaviors here are what are called mate retention tactics. These range from vigilance to violence. The things that will persuade your mate that they shouldn't be seeing any other men, and ways of preventing the likelihood that they're going to go off with somebody else. That's what we're talking about here. Some of them are more typical of men, and some are more typical of women. Men are more likely to display resources, that is, give them expensive gifts or drive flash cars, showing off their wealth. They're also more likely to conceal their mate, that is, perhaps not take them out to a party where they know that there might be some attractive rival males present. They leave them at home, go off by themselves. In the case of some Muslim societies, of course, concealment of the mate is quite literal. Put them in a kind of a shroud so that other males will not get excited by them. Men are also more likely than women to submit to them totally, to grovel and plead. Don't leave me, you can't leave me, I need you kind of thing. I love you, I need you. That sort of tactic is perhaps surprising, more male than female. Perhaps more obviously, they are more likely to threaten punishment to the mate and offer violence to the rivals themselves. Women specialize more in appearance enhancement, that is, clothes and makeup that will make them more attractive, which is all this obsession with thinness and shopping and so on, which is intended as either mate acquisition or indeed mate retention. They're also, interestingly, more likely to deliberately induce jealousy in their partner, show an interest in the rival just to keep him on his toes. Look, better stay around and watch me, or I might be off somewhere else, is the statement that is being made there. Now, it's not surprising that the vigour with which these mate retention tactics are pursued relates to the mate value of the partner, which in the case of the female is physical attractiveness primarily, and where the female partner is judging the mate value of the male, it is more to do with income and social status. The other factor involved in the vigour with which mate retention is pursued is the likelihood of them straying, which is where that female tactic of pretending to be interested in another male might come in, being flirtatious. In other words, women have more motives for flirting than you might imagine, not just to turn on a rival male, but to have an impact on the regular male. Now, it might seem rather paradoxical, but abuse, insult, belittling, humiliation of a partner can function as a mate retention strategy, or may be motivated in that way. Verbal, perhaps even physical abuse can impair the self-worth of the partner such that they feel they have no options. They reason to themselves, well, who else would want me because I'm no good to anybody. Their partner has managed to persuade them that they are of little value, and hence they stay around because they think they couldn't do any better. Their self-confidence has been shattered. And many observers have puzzled over why women stay with abusive husbands and partners. And this might be the psychological power that is underlying it. Just take that off again for a second. So far, the discussion has been on the lines of sort of cold logic with no mention of morality. Now, I want to make it very clear that because it is adaptive in evolutionary terms for a particular behaviour to occur, that does not endorse it. Adaptive does not mean justifiable. We still need to have morals. Human civilization depends upon restraint. We're not slaves to our instinct. Knowing that a baby is more likely to be killed by a foster father than a biological father doesn't make the murder of baby P any less horrific. Or if a husband catches his wife in bed with a rival and murders him, we might understand it as a crime of passion, but again, we must have a legal system that does not regard that as sufficient justification. I don't know if you've ever seen a film called Divorce Italian Style. That apparently is the logic that Italian courts used to regard killing a spouse in a fit of jealousy as a crime of passion that was much less important than any other kind of murder, or much less justifiable or understandable, perhaps, such that even if convicted of that crime, a husband might serve 6 months or get a suspended sentence or something, and he'd be back out very soon afterwards. We don't operate that kind of logic anymore, and nor should we. Because it's a crime of passion doesn't excuse it. We need morality, we need restraint, and we have various systems in force that will back up our morality. One is the law, of course, the most obvious one. Traditionally, religious scriptures has been another. We have the Ten Commandments or Sharia law, which will help in moral restraint. Now, these can, of course, become rather dated and perhaps inappropriate, though there are fundamentalists who will continue to cling to them rather tenaciously. But we nevertheless need systems in place in society that will back up moral restraint. Another thing that has been going on more recently is a tendency to medicalize behaviours that we regard as inappropriate, troublesome, or offensive in some way. The term sexual addiction, or sex addiction, bit of a misnomer, I would say, because it normally, the term addiction refers to the chemical hijacking of brain circuits that have been evolved to reward behavior that is of survival benefit. Sex being a pretty obvious one, of course. So the idea that you can be addicted to sex strikes me as a little bit odd. Nevertheless, an extremely strong sex drive can be disruptive to family life. It can get out of control. It can lead to charges of rape or harassment. And it might be that some form of training in self-control would be helpful. You're probably familiar with a number of men, often Hollywood film stars like Michael Douglas, have entered therapy, so-called, in the hope of repairing their marriage, probably with their arm twisted way up their back on the point of, from a wife who is angry with the recent behaviour. Now, the danger of attaching medical labels like this for what is actually just bad behaviour is that we give the so-called afflicted individual an excuse that kind of lets him off the hook. It helps him to evade responsibility for their actions. And at the same time, it adds nothing of scientific value, as far as I can see. The pharmaceutical companies are always trying to cash in on this by coming up with drugs that are aimed at these newly identified disorders. Good for sales. The insurance companies play into this scenario by reinforce this sort of fiction by demanding that people have identified, diagnosed disorders that have got a nice, pretty medical-sounding name to them before they will shell out for treatment. It's got to be in the DSM-4 or something, list of psychiatric illnesses, before they will pay for your treatment. So this is another pressure towards attaching what I would regard as fairly inappropriate labels, when for the most part we are simply dealing with bad behaviour, troublesome either to the individual themselves or more likely to everybody else around them. And of course, in some ways, the religious concept of sin was more apt, because this is immoral behaviour, it's not an illness. So, finally, what can we do about making peace in these sex wars? Well, maybe ultimately very little, because, as I say, the seeds of conflict are very deep-rooted in the fact that men and women have different desires that are difficult to reconcile. The first step towards peace, I think, probably is to understand the causes of the conflict. And in this regard, I hope that evolutionary psychology can be enlightening. Some people just find it infuriating, but I hope some of you might find it enlightening. So the ostrich position is no use here. We have to recognize the fact that men and women are different, have different needs, and their desires can never be simultaneously satisfied. If we fully understand those principles, we're in a better position to engage with our partner and understand what might be troubling them. Well, the next step, of course, towards harmony, as indeed it might be in the field of international diplomacy, is to tolerate these differences, is to develop habits of tolerance. And ultimately, perhaps, we need to arrive at negotiated compromises that will quite openly take account of the differences and the needs of our partner. Because one thing is for sure, we can't live apart from each other. Men and women need each other because of, not despite, the differences. And as Henry Kissinger once said, nobody will ever win the battle of the sexes. There's too much fraternizing with the enemy. And thank you for listening.